The ice house structures, of which 4 still remain intact, are located south of 𝗬𝗏𝗀𝗀. These large, conically domed earthen structures would have had sheets of ice built up on the ground level over the course of the winter to provide year-round ice supplies. Don't miss the beginning of the lecture since it is very often most valuable part, for instance, because it reviews previous lectures or outlines objects and lecture structure. If you easily get distracted by other students, sit near the front. In order to achieve the free flow of goods and services, with work and capital between the member countries, they needed to establish mutual politics in areas as diverse as agriculture, transport, and when they concerned with a far wider range of issues. A simple barometric altimeter includes a sealed metal chamber, a spring, and a pointer that shows altitude in meters or feet. The chamber expands as air pressure decreases and contracts as it increases, bending the spring and moving the pointer. An altimeter can be mounted on an aircraft's instrument panel or worn on a person's wrist. People have used biomass energy from living things since the earliest cavemen first made wood fires for cooking or keeping warm. Biomass is organic, meaning it is made of material that comes from living organisms, such as plants and animals. The most common biomass materials used for energy are plants, wood, and waste. Desalination is the answer to long-term water security, but it's also expensive and energy-intensive. The good news is that scientists are developing some viable solutions. The first desalination plant in Europe was built in Spain nearly a half-century ago. Since then, facilities have sprung up in water-stressed regions throughout Europe. The most widely accepted model for planet formation, known as the nebular hypothesis, begins with a swirling disk of gas and dust left over material from the birth of a nearby star. At some point in time, gravity triumphs over the pressure supporting this cosmic dust, which then starts to rotate, quickly collapsing under its own gravity. Scholars build their own personal libraries to support not only particular projects but also general reading in their field. They buy or make photocopies of materials when possible, so they can consult them frequently, make pages and write annotation on them. When moving into a new field, they add to their collections, usually concentrating on primary texts. Behavioral and social sciences research helps predict, prevent, and manage illness in individuals and in whole populations. This research also helps people change their behaviorism, understands treatments, and learn how to stick with them. Society's role is significant, too. Access to health care affects decision-making and behavior. Undergraduates may choose to major in any one of 125 academic majors. The university's distinguished faculty includes internationally known scientists, authors, and teachers who are committed to continuing the university's tradition in providing one of the highest quality undergraduate educations available. The world's fifth largest continent, Antarctica, is almost entirely covered by ice 2,000 meters thick. The area sustains varied wildlife including seals, whales and penguins. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 and enforced since 1961, provides for international governance of Antarctica. Over the past 5 years, through studies of the simplest conceivable clocks, the researchers have discovered the fundamental limits of timekeeping. They've mapped out new relationships between accuracy, information, complexity, energy, and entropy, the quantity whose incessant rise in the universe is closely associated with the arrow of time. No planet will have a complex form of life that popped into existence all on its own. Whatever life is like on an alien planet, it must have begun simply. But if life is to achieve any kind of complexity, the only way that complexity can accumulate is if favorable changes and innovations are retained and unfavorable ones are lost. A patriarchal family is one run by the father or eldest male of a household. He usually decides the duties of the women and children in the family. In this role, the patriarch solves family disputes and divides the family's wealth. The patriarch is also the spiritual leader of the family because he is thought to be the closest to the spirits of the family's ancestors. The robotic system is composed of a floating platform with 8 cables that are connected to a mobile robot that will move around on the seafloor beneath it to collect waste items in a box, using a gripper, hook, or suction device depending on the size of the litter. The orientation of the robot can be controlled by adjusting the tension of the cables. The use of technologies for the inclusion and empowerment of persons with disabilities is not new. From the creation of Braille and the first hearing aid to the invention of the wheelchair. For disabled persons, new assistive technology can make all the difference, while technology and innovation are breaking down the barriers to achieving full participation. The mathematical language for talking about connections, which usually depends on networks, vertices and edges, has been an invaluable way to model real-world phenomena. But a few decades ago, the emergence of giant data sets forced researchers to expand their toolboxes and at the same time, gave them sprawling sandboxes to apply new mathematical insights. According to Einstein's general theory of relativity, the gravity of a black hole is so intense that nothing can escape it. The more sophisticated understanding of black holes developed by Stephen Hawking and his colleagues did not question this principle. Hawking and others sought to describe matter in and around black holes using quantum theory, but they continued to describe gravity using Einstein's classical theory. the idea of self-dissemination vaccines has floated through epidemiological circles for decades, conceived mainly as a tool for protecting the health of wildlife. But evolutionary biologists have refreshed the proposal with evidence from their own modeling and other experimental work, which suggests that self-dissemination vaccines could be a safe and practical way to head off zoonotic pandemics as well. The scientists found that division of reproductive labor in ants arose when an ancient insulin signaling pathway typically involved in maintaining nutrition and growth, became responsive to social cues. In doing so, they also uncovered deeper insights into a process underlying how the environment gets under the skin to affect behavior, physiology, and the health and well-being of other members of a society. Outside the biblical tradition, Babylon intrigued Greek and Roman writers, who added to the rich store of legends that have come down to the present day. Popular tales of Babylon's fantastic structure may also be products of legends and confusion. Yet to historians and archaeologists, Babylon is a real bricks and mortar place at the center of the vibrant Mesopotamian culture. Medieval map makers supposedly inscribed the phrase "Here be dragons" on maps showing unknown regions of the world. Unfortunately, apart from an inscription on a globe, this claim is unfounded. Although there were no dragons, and the inscription "Here be dragons" was virtually never used, some of the purported earliest map makers did have to deal with real and formidable megafauna. Prevailing winds are winds that blow from a single direction over a specific area of the Earth. Area where prevailing winds meet are called convergence zones. Generally, prevailing winds blow east-west rather than north-south. This happens because Earth's rotation generates what is known as the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect makes wind systems twist counter-clockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. A newly created form of carbon in a mesh just one atom thick is tantalizing scientists with hints that it could sharply improve rechargeable batteries and allow wires so small that can operate at a scale where metals fail. The material is highly conductive and may prove able to store more electrical energy than even graphene, the astonishing atomic thickness carbon honeycomb material identified nearly 20 years ago. Studying how mouse brains process chemo signals will help researchers understand general principles of how their brains form social memories, and could help scientists identify what happens when these functions go wrong. Eventually, this may help scientists understand what happens in people whose ability to recognize other is impaired or those who have difficulties with social interactions caused by autism. Hydrogen will play several roles in our future. For transport, we now see several manufacturers launching cars powered by electricity produced in a hydrogen fuel cell, and this will happen even more in the near future. Fuel cell buses are also an attractive solution for public transport. Also, engineers are now even starting to consider using fuel cells and hydrogen to power trains. To withstand the forces of nature and the huge forces the rotation itself generates, blades are manufactured with multi-layer coat of armor. Typically, the outer layer erodes during operation and the inner layers can become detached. Although the lifespan of a turbine is theoretically 25 years, current medium-sized systems typically require extensive maintenance at about 10 years due to blade deterioration. Online speech has become such an influential way of experiencing politics today, not just participating in democratic processes like elections but also the way we lead our daily democratic life through digital communication. If these sorts of irreverent and vitriolic exchange are so prominent online, then we need to see how we can bring nuance to understanding them. There are other components, aside from the wheels and rails, that add to the noise a train makes when it passes. Older trains had their air conditioning units underneath the carriage, but modern trains have been lowered to allow people with less mobility to enter the carriage more easily. As a result, air conditioning units are now on top of the carriage, where they add to the train noise. The stratosphere is the next layer up from Earth's surface. Temperatures in the stratosphere increase with altitude. A high concentration of ozone, a molecule composed of 3 atoms of oxygen, makes up the ozone layer of the stratosphere. This ozone absorbs some of the incoming solar radiation, shielding life on Earth from potentially harmful ultraviolet light.